There we go. We are live. Hey, Dr. Baker, how's it going?
Marco, it's going well. How you doing today?
Good, man. Hey, guys, I don't know if you know who Dr. Shawn Baker is, and every podcast that I've listened to of you, you've done this epic introduction of yourself, but I'm going to try and take the burden on that one so that you don't have to do it again, if that's cool.
That's fine.
Yeah, awesome. So Dr. Shawn Baker, from what I know, orthopedic surgeon, former athlete, used to play with the All Blacks. You hold some world records. For us in Australia, you're kind of like our enemy because the All Blacks always beat us in rugby. You served, I believe. I don't know whether it was in Afghanistan or Iraq.
Yeah, I was in Afghanistan. Let me just clarify. I played against a lot of the All Blacks while playing in sort of the top league, union rugby leagues, but I wasn't on the All Blacks or anything. So I played against a lot of those guys, and I understand your frustration with them beating the poor Wallabies all the time, and so it is. But I guess their sort of criticism. I've got to move my location because my computer's dying. But their criticism would be something to do with underhand bowling when it comes to cricket. So maybe you.
Maybe we'll get them there. Hey,
some sort of story there. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I understand you served in Afghanistan, and then you had something to do with nuclear weapons. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I was deployed as an orthopedic surgeon, doing war trauma in Afghanistan. I did it for about 6 months back in 2007. Working among the NATO forces. So we took care of the U.S. forces. We took care of Australians, the British, the Finlanders, the Swedish, the French, and the Afghans, and even some of the bad guys and a lot of the local nationals. And so or the local civilians. And so we, just saw ungodly, awful trauma, unfortunately. And prior to that, I kind of had 2 tours in the military. And prior to my going to medical school, I served as a nuclear weapons launch officer. So I was, underground in a launch control facility, and I had, 150 nuclear warheads, which I was, kind of in control of at any one given, particular work shift. And so, if we had gone to nuclear war, I'd be one of the guys that would have, I guess, press the button or turn the key or however you want to say it. But that fortunately never came to that, and hopefully never will. But so I've had some kind of sort of weird directions in my life, from athlete to doctor to nuclear weapons guy to back to athlete to now crazy nutrition, I guess, advocate. But yeah, it's been fun.
Well, the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because that's a huge load of responsibility on a single person, right? And you'd have to be somebody who checks out in character, intelligence, decision making. You can't be just a off the wall type of guy to have that responsibility. But when people hear about the carnivore diet and when people kind of look at, oh my God, eating just meat, you've got to be crazy to do that. The reason why I wanted to bring up your background is because you're not, right? You've actually most likely thought about this really carefully and have some strong decision making there and thought processes.
Yeah, there's something called the personal reliability program. So you are, extensively screened. You're given a top secret, extra sensitive information clearance. So you're thoroughly screened for mental health disorders or just like you said, poor decision making capability. And I've always been pretty skeptical, I guess I would say conservative in my belief system. That is to say, I don't sort of jump on the latest thing unless there's compelling evidence in my view. And even as a surgeon, I wasn't an early adopter of some new sort of operation or procedure. I wanted to see what played out. And so you're absolutely right. I am skeptical, and I still remain even skeptical of what I'm doing because I want to make sure that as we learn more information, we're not harming people. And so that's one of the reasons I'm pushing for research. That's one of the reasons I continue to collect data on this. And, my advocacy, thus far has been based upon excellent results. And if that changed, I would no longer advocate, or I would advocate a different, a modification, so on and so forth. And so you're right. I am not somebody that's just out there and just kind of got a wild hair and said, hey, let's everybody go eat meat. And, I feel like I'm convinced to do it because I truly believe that, we need to figure out something that works. And, it's not that it works for me, it works for people that listen to me. And I think that's the best sort of evidence that what you're doing is perhaps right. And so, like I said, it doesn't matter what you teach. It matters what people are able to absorb and do for themselves. And if they can demonstrate results, then there must be likely some truth in that.
Absolutely, yeah. I always say to our patients and to the clients that I work with, problem solving is a process of elimination and not addition. And when in the space that we're in, when people have either gut issues or autoimmune, they try adding a bunch of things, the next superfood or the next supplement or the next thing that's marketed, when really an elimination diet and something as simple as eat meat, salt, and drink water is probably the way to solve it.
I think there's a lot of truth in that, but I mean, you do have to be cognizant of the fact that, yes, nutrient deficiencies do exist. And so there are people who are, yes, but I would say the opposite. Say some people that are on maybe a nutrient poor standard American junk food diet, perhaps a poorly designed plant food diet. Much of the, kind of the third world population, they need stuff added to their diet, and often it's animal food, it's eggs, it's chicken, it's milk, it's meat, or something like that. So you are right in a way, particularly in affluent societies where food is not an issue, where they got plenty of food. It's usually they're eating the wrong food and they have to take it away. I think that generally that's right. I mean, we don't necessarily, when we have diseases, it's not because we have a deficiency of some drug, or drug or supplement typically. So I'm sort of critical of that approach. Now, there are people that get rickets, and there are people that get scurvy, and there are people that get iron deficiency anemia, and that is something we have to add to. But generally, if we're saying, there's a diet that can provide what we need and not provide stuff we don't need or stuff that's potentially harmful, I would make an argument, and it's an argument that you have to make because not everybody believes that, because there's some things that that people will question. But I would say that a meat-based, animal-based diet is probably, and I'm not going to put probably. I don't speak in absolutes typically because I don't know, and I'm certainly, the only thing I say I'm certain about is that I'm wrong about something. I don't know what it is yet, and maybe I'll find that out. Maybe I won't. But but yeah, in general, I agree with that sentiment in general with a few caveats.
Yeah. So for the people who don't know what you do, I mean, I know you have Meat RX, and I know right now you guys are doing some research, and it's Carnivore Month, and I think you're looking to raise funds with a Harvard study to do some research on the carnivore diet. Yeah.
So Meat RX is a company that myself and my co-founder, who's a technical founder out up in Silicon Valley, is founded. And we right now we're a resource for people doing this diet, a big support community, but we are collecting data. We're trying to figure more things out. We're trying to learn from this community. We are raising money to fund a large carnivore-based clinical intervention trial, and that's underway. Harvard has done a study, and I helped to sort of facilitate that by getting people to volunteer. I'm not an author on the study. I didn't do anything with the data. I haven't even seen the data, but that study is independent of me, but it's being done by Professor David Ludwig and as a senior author, and Dr. Belinda Leonards as a principal author, and they're out of Harvard University, out of Boston Children's Hospital. And so that will be, I know they're done data collecting. I think they're in the process of writing that up now, so I'm sure it'll be submitted for publication in the very near future. But we're funding a completely different study that is more of an intervention trial. Theirs was more of a kind of a survey type data. They wanted to just look at the carnivore population, look at some labs pre and post, see how they're doing, and so on and so forth. So I think they got about 2,000 participants in that study. So it'll be a pretty robust study. Should be interesting. And like I said, I don't know the results yet, so it may show that everybody that entered their data is sick as can be, and and we have to rethink our game. But I don't think that'll be the case. But we'll find out soon.
Amazing. I'm excited to see that. Shawn, eating a carnivore diet is probably not. You're not doing it for fun, right? I love steak and I love meat, but when people do an elimination diet, it's usually because they feel so great on it that they don't want to start adding things back in. So what was it? To eat just meat, salt, and water, you have to feel pretty amazing doing that and not adding, I think you probably miss some foods. Berries taste great. Chocolate's amazing. People love to eat fruit. What were the benefits that made you want to just stick to this, and kind of like, what's your story behind it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I do have fun with the diet. I like it. I enjoy cooking a nice steak, and I cook all kinds of ways, and I have other meats besides just that. But generally, like this month in particular, World Carnivore Month, which is every January, I started that 4 years ago because my birthday's in January, and I didn't like the fact that it was Veganuary. So I said, well, hell with that. We're going to do Carnivore Month. And so we've had tens of thousands of people participate, including people like Joe Rogan and some other fairly popular people that have done well and enjoyed it. My particular reason for doing so is exactly that. I feel and perform good. I mean, like I said, it's like, it's like, don't you get bored eating meat? And I turn around and say, don't you get bored being in pain all the time or not feeling good? So you can turn that around any way you want. And, if you think about the human diet, I mean, what we have now, we have so many options. I mean, and some people will love that. They'll say, well, look, food has never been more delicious. It's never been cheaper. It's never been more ubiquitous. You can get it anywhere for most people. There's a few people in the world that don't have access to it, but by and large, in most developed societies, food shortages are not typically a problem outside of, against some rare instances. So we've got, 31 flavors of ice cream is probably 1,000 flavors by now, but you get the point. So we've got this stuff that never in the history of humanity have we had so many options. What did people do 500 years ago? Were they bored to death because they only could eat, 12 foods that grew locally around them? I mean, they had great lives. They're probably free of chronic disease like we were, outside of maybe, nutrient deficiency, starving, and infections. But I mean, the old people back then lived to 80 and 90 years old. Ben Franklin was 83, Michelangelo was in his 80s. We got evidence of people that if they had sufficient access to nutrition, they lived long lives and generally relatively healthy. They weren't giant, large, obese people. And so I don't look at it as a way as I'm missing out. So I can walk to the grocery store and there's a lot of food. I say, well, that looks interesting, but there's a new flavor of something. There's some new flavor food combination that you see every day in the food industry. It has to keep doing that because it is not inherently satisfying long-term to people. They keep looking for something new, the next trend, the next song. It's like a pop song. What's the next song? I get bored of this one. And then there's the classics, there's like classical music is always good, depending on, some people don't like it, but meat is always good. I mean, I don't think there's ever a time in the history of humanity where people say, wow, a nicely cooked steak, nice sear, a little bit of salt on that is something we wouldn't like. I would have liked it now like I would have liked it, 200, 300, 500 years ago. I mean, it's always there. So I feel fortunate. I feel very lucky that I'm able to eat the way I do. And I appreciate that not everybody in the world can do that. And it doesn't mean that just because of that, that what I'm doing is inherently bad or wrong, or I shouldn't do it. I mean, like I said, I think you should, and this is one of the gripes I have with the U.S. dietary guidelines. We come out and they have this thing, this is how you're supposed to eat. I don't think we can know that. I think you should tell people, hey, eat in a way that makes you feel healthy or makes you actually healthy. And that would be my dietary guidelines. And whether that's veganism or carnivore or Mediterranean diet, I don't really care. But I mean, I think what we're doing is trying to prescribe a one-size-fits-all dietary pattern on the population. And first of all, I'd say we weren't even evolutionarily evolved for the prescribed diet, just because, if you look at it, eat your, 10 grains a day and your 5 fruits and vegetables. And many of these foods don't even grow in the same continent, not even the same region, but they're not even from the same continent. It's like, how the heck would anyone have been able to eat that diet? How can that be the wild human diet? And I make the argument that, if I'm going to feed a zebra, and I'm trying to figure out what a zebra eats, I'm not going to go in the grocery store to figure out what a zebra eats. I'm going to go look, what is he eating in the wild? That's what a zebra needs to eat. So humans, we don't really have that anymore because everybody's eating in the grocery store. If we went back and said, what would a wild human eat? They would eat what was available to them. And then you can argue about what was available to them. And I would argue meat was definitely on the menu in large quantities for sure.
Absolutely. From some of the patients that I've worked with, and we've transitioned a lot of them from a vegetarian-based diet to a meat-based diet, and they always say to me, I have this urge or this craving to eat meat. It's as if my body wants to eat meat. And I think that's a primal thing in us, and I think everybody needs protein and to be honest, blood. I find a lot of people that are fatigued, have chronic fatigue, iron deficiency anemia, microcytic anemia, macrocytic anemia. When we start to reintroduce, in particular, red meat, they feel a lot better, and they feel better really, really quickly. And so I think society overall has, the food industry is creating these frankenfoods, these packaged food-like products that are being pushed on everybody. And we've forgotten what real food looks like.
Well, that's certainly true. I mean, food is typically not fluorescent blue. We see these, these colors and crazy things. Who the heck thinks that's normal? I mean, but one of the things and this is something I've learned recently, in fact, that there's a study called nutriomics in there. So it talks about nutrient properties of certain foods, and it's more than just fat and protein and amino acids and vitamins and minerals. There are Within beef itself, there's something like 55,000 different compounds that have now been identified. All of them, or many of them, or perhaps at least some of them, and we don't know yet, have unique effects on the human body. And so when we try to replicate that with, say, plant-based food, like we take these Beyond Meat burgers, these Impossible burgers, and they've actually done a study. Stefan von Vliet, rather, out of Duke University, has done a recent study looking at that. And when they look at all these 55,000 nutriomic compounds and they compare that plant burger versus meat burger, there's only about 10% overlap. So even though the plant burger may taste like it, look like it, smell like it, cook like it, have the mouth feel of that, assuming they can get this better and better, it's not meat. It never will be meat. The argument then becomes culture meat. We can talk about that differently, but meat is meat and beef and chicken and pork and all those things have unique properties that are more than just the few things on the nutrition label. There are thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of different nutrients and chemicals in there that all probably have a role, but most of which we don't know yet, because it's just, we can hardly figure out what cholesterol does in our body. We're still debating about that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much new science coming out that's so different to what it looked like 20 years ago. What I found actually with cholesterol is that a lot of the time it's not really the issue. The issue is high carbohydrate diets, high inflammation, and people tend to get cardiovascular disease because of the inflammatory levels and not so much the cholesterol. Cholesterol is actually really necessary. If you have too little of it, you're going to be in trouble. So that's a whole nother thing we can talk about. One of the things that I guess when people first hear about the idea of just eating meat, what about vegetables? What about fiber? How do we go around that? What's your take on fiber, and is it going to be detrimental to people to not have fiber?
Well, I can speak from personal experience of thousands of other people that don't eat fiber. They do just fine. Their gut function is wonderful. They will often say it's the best they felt. We've seen lots of people with inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, which is extremely common and becoming more common. Those people generally get better. And so I would argue that if you're going to say that fiber is essential to good gut health, I would say that what about all the people that are getting good gut health and feeling better and losing diseases in the absence of fiber? So that's a big sort of red flag there, that I would say that sort of belief system is at least challengeable. I would say, the one thing I think, and I think there is some nuance here, and I think that, it's not necessarily inherent that these foods, like a berry that clearly humans ate. I mean, there's plenty of evidence, ample evidence that, we were opportunistic omnivores. We would eat these things in season if we found them, when we found them, how long we had them, probably depending on where in the world you were, it might not have been that often. But I think that what's happening is we're seeing our gut is becoming so compromised by this modern chemical, concoction of food that we're eating constantly, that our gut is either dysbiotic with, the bacteria aren't the right bacteria, or the membranes are leaky or hyperpermeable, that no matter what you put into that gut, that food can become problematic. And I think this is one of the things we see with something called TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, which is something that a lot of people are worried about, because meat can lead to the induction of TMAO or TMA in the gut, which can be converted into TMAO by the liver. We're finding out that seems to be possible when the gut is dysbiotic. So what's happening is not the meat that's causing the problem; it's the poorly adapted gut, which is maybe eluding these compounds. And so it's kind of a conditional thing. So if you fix the gut, i.e., remove all the garbage from your diet, then meat's totally fine. And it may be the same thing we're getting with people that are now sensitive to cruciferous vegetables. Some people say, I eat broccoli and my guts are just torn up. I feel miserable. Maybe that has to do with, a damaged gut and imbalanced, microbiome. Again, this is stuff that we don't know yet. Now, people that say we do, they can tell you what it is. They don't know yet. It's just too complicated, and there's not the ability to know that at this time. So I think there's a lot of conditional and contextual things out there. So some of the, if you look at some of the epidemiologic studies, and the typical response from people that like eat meat to say, hey, look, they survey meat eaters, and there's a slightly increased risk for, say, colorectal cancer. It's about 1.18 relative risk, which is tiny. It's tiny, tiny, tiny. Most people just dismiss it outright just because it's such a low relative risk. Other people will say, well, there's a huge healthy user bias in there where, we didn't screen enough, or we didn't weight good enough the fact that people eat meat tend to be more overweight. They tend to drink more, smoke more. They don't have healthy behaviors. And so that's called the healthy user bias. And therefore, if we control for that, and we do like the healthy shoppers test, a study out of the UK, or the 45 and up study done out of Australia, where that all falls apart and meat doesn't cause a problem. But there's this other overlying thing is, what if the fact that, there's a difference between Western epidemiology and, say, epidemiology from Asia. When you look at meat in Asia, the relationships fall apart. There's no real relationship. It's only when you look at the Western countries. And so you're saying, well, what's between the Western countries and the Asian countries? Well, some people say it's genetics. I would propose it maybe the fact that the Asian countries still had a more traditional diet. Maybe it's fruits and vegetables and some rice and meat, but they're not eating seed oils and a bunch of high fructose corn syrup and 50,000 chemicals that's destroying the gut. And so now we have this different relationship. So I think there's a lot of ways to look at this. What I do know is the easiest way to sort of sort this thing out is remove all those variables, go strict meat and see what happens. That's the easiest test. That to me is the most common sense, logical test. And when I do that, and when thousands and thousands and thousands of other people do that, with rare exception, they get leaner, they see their diabetes go away, they see their autoimmune issues improve, they see their skin issues improve, they see their their gut issues improve, they see their mental health improve, energy improves, their libido improves, everything gets better. So it's kind of hard to paint that as a bad guy if you just isolate that variable and say, wait a minute, how could that be bad? If I just told everybody all you're going to eat now are potato chips, we would probably see some unhappy, sickly, tired, lethargic people with skin issues and so on and so forth. But I don't know anybody's out there pushing the potato chip diet. There may be a few people do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why that's so difficult for people to understand is because our culture has always pushed the idea of get all of your food groups in, and what about, like, here in Australia, we have, Weet-Bix advertisements for breakfast, and all these athletes like the Wallabies promoting, if you don't eat 8 Weet-Bix for breakfast, you might just die of a sugar crash by 10 a.m. So we've had all of these things ingrained into our brain since we were young. And then to say to somebody, hey, actually, I want you to do some intermittent fasting. So don't eat all day and then feast at night with just meat. They go, what in the hell? Like, how? But, it's hundreds now, probably 100 years of advertising ingrained into our nervous system and our brain.
Right, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's advertising. That's what it is. This didn't exist, 200 years ago. I mean, there wasn't Nabisco and Kellogg's and Sanitarium and PepsiCo and Coca-Cola that had these multi-billion-dollar advertising budgets and paying for research to be done and all nonstop paying for media. So we do have that. It is intergenerational. You train mom, and then mom trains her kids, and then their kids train, and it's a gift that keeps giving, and I say that in a sort of facetious way, but it is. And so you have to go upstream, you're swimming upstream when you go against that message, because, if, and I have no sort of illusions that the whole world is going to give up grains and sugar and no one's going to eat cake again. I don't care if they do, but if that were to happen, obviously the entire economy would be flipped upside down. I mean, restaurants would close, everything have to change. There'd be nothing but steakhouses, and it would suit me fine. I mean, I wouldn't care, but I mean, that's not going to happen. But I think the thing that, you have to sort of overcome at this point is, you have to realize that these plant-based foods, particularly these processed foods, are increasingly profitable because they're incredibly cheap. They are, and the nice thing is, you can make them taste like whatever you want. You can they taste good. Most people, as long as they got food that tastes good, they're good. I'm turn off. My brain's done. Give me something that tastes good. It lights up some dopamine receptors or whatever, and goodness, that's all I need. I'm happy, or I think I'm happy. Discount the fact that my knee hurts and I'm tired all the time and I'm depressed, but I'm shoving food that tastes good in my mouth all the time. So, there's thank you God for that. But we have to, like I said, I think there's a point, and the point is, we're seeing this, and you're seeing it in Australia, you're seeing it in other words. we're seeing, certainly not to get too conspiratorial here, but I mean, there's been a very, we see how the media can be very strongly, a message can be driven one way, and messages that are not, in accordance with that, or dissenting voices are just snuffed out. And this can be, we saw this with coronavirus and politics, and again, not picking sides here, but I'm just saying when that is so easily done, you can very quickly say, well, who controls the media, who owns the media, who's giving them the most money? Well, these guys that are willing to pay, billions of dollars to tell you meat is bad for the environment, meat is making you sick, meat is making you fat. Oh, how dare you eat a cow because he's so cute and cuddly. That message is resonating with a lot of people, and particularly the younger people who are brainwashed. And then you sort of nurture and raise these people on fake meat or whatever, soy milk. They don't know any better. They have no frame of reference. It's like a lot of times, like I didn't know before I went on a fully meat-based diet. I didn't know that I was not feeling good or optimal. I just thought that was my normal existence, and so I was kind of ignorant to that. And then all of a sudden, when I go on a meet, I'm like, well, my quadricep, which has been hurting me for 10 years, stopped hurting. That's odd. The fact that I'm sleeping better, well, that's odd now. The fact that my digestion, I don't even know I'm digesting food. I mean, I just, literally, I ate 2 pounds of steak and then did a crazy sprinting workout on a rowing machine just 15 minutes later. Like, you didn't even notice that before. Your guts would blow up, and so it's the thing is, if you never appreciate. I guess, it depends where you grow up. There's people in North Korea that grow up and thinking this is life, this is normal, this is how we are. And it's not till the few of them that escape are like, holy cow, that wasn't normal, but they're being told that's normal. And so this is what the danger is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we've normalized as a society. I mean, people don't know what feeling good feels like. They think that waking up in the morning and being exhausted and feeling bloated and having constipation and having diarrhea and all that is normal, and you're told that on advertising. In Australia here, we have tighter restrictions on advertising than you guys do in the US, but still you turn on the television and there's anti-acid medication being advertised and anti-anxiety medication being advertised and all of these things, and people just think it's normal, and it's not.
Yeah, I rarely watch TV anymore. I mean, about the only times I'll watch it, I'll have TV is maybe if I'm in a hotel room and I'll flip on the TV and I'll see it. But I mean, it is literally, US TV has devolved to, whatever the program is for a few minutes. It's usually some sort of inane, idiotic program. And then it's followed by junk food commercial, followed by drug commercial. I mean, that's basically, maybe a few car commercials in there, but that's basically what we have. Eat our junk food, take our drugs. Eat our junk food, take our drugs. You just watch where the priorities are and where the profits are being made. And that's it's sad, but it's true. And I don't think maybe most people don't care. That's the thing. And I know, like when I was in France, I was amazed. I was on their TV and they would have an advertisement for some junk food, but at the bottom of the screen they would say, this is basically junk food. I mean, it wasn't exactly that worded, but it was basically, hey guys, this food is likely to make you fat and sick, something. So but we don't have that in the US. And again, I don't know what Australia is like. I have not been to Australia. One day, maybe I'll get down there, hopefully.
You should definitely come. You should definitely come over here. There's beautiful beaches and lots of physical activities you could do.
Yeah, I'm sure. I know. Like I said, when I lived in New Zealand, I never got the chance to come to Australia. I guess it's a little challenging to go to Australia right now with quarantines and whatnot. So maybe that's a year away or something. Who knows?
And we have great beef.
Yeah, I definitely had some Australian beef and Australian lamb, and so yeah, you guys do have some good beef.
Awesome. Hey, so we know that eating all the processed junk like the grains and the standard Western diet is really bad for us, but what about quote unquote healthy vegetables, right? Now, the way that I kind of explain this to my patients when I say, hey, I need you to really eliminate, cruciferous veggies or raw spinach and raw kale because you have thyroid issues and digestive issues, the way that I explain it in simple terms is plants can't run away from you. So one of the ways that they make sure that their species survive over time and not be overeaten is by producing toxins and chemicals and things that may, if you overconsume them, impact your nervous system, your endocrine system, mess with your digestion. So can we eliminate that for a little while and see if we can bring stuff back in and test it? But what about like healthy? I know that when you did the podcast with Michaela, she talked about bringing lettuce back in and having a flare up which to some people may seem absurd. But what are your thoughts on just healthy vegetables, or quote unquote?
Well, I mean, these are like I said, you're kind of getting some tautological arguments, because when you say healthy vegetables, that implies that they're inherently healthy. When I would say, I don't define foods as healthy or unhealthy. I think it depends on the person. It depends on, and it may be a temporal thing. It may be that for a period of time, and this is something I'm fascinated with in doing research and data collecting to try to find out. It may be that, young people can eat more of these foods than old people can. I mean, there very well may be that, and why that is, there may be a lot of reasons. Maybe that females can eat something different than males can eat. Maybe people from warm tropical climates can eat different than polar climates. I mean, that's something that may go into that. And so all these sort of quote unquote vegetables or fruits or food categories, you can say healthy or unhealthy, but I would say that I think it really depends on the person. I know there's this sort of, and when you talk about nutrition science, or the sort of the field of dietetics is about 100 years old. It goes back, the American Dietetics Association was founded in 1917 in the U.S. primarily by a group of Seventh-day Adventists who were strongly religiously believing that, a vegetarian diet was the way to go, and meat was evil, and it led to impure thoughts and masturbation and lustfulness, and we should sort of eat this Garden of Eden diet, so to speak, to quote Belinda Fetke, who's one of your Australian fellows. So we've always had this sort of nutritional bias. Whether that's been justified or not, I would argue probably not. But clearly, there are many people that eat vegetables and do fine. There clearly are. I mean, that you can't deny that. But they're just as equally, there are a lot of people that eat vegetables, or at least some vegetables, where it really causes problems for them. And what that is, what that unique compound or compounds are, is perhaps to be determined. Some people will say it's oxalate, some people call it lectin, some people will say it's glycoalkaloids or goitrogens or cyanogenic alkaloids, or the list goes on and on and on and on. Terpenes and saponins and so on and so forth. So you can sort of say that it's not that broccoli is bad. I make this point. It's not that carbohydrate is necessarily bad. I don't think glucose is necessarily bad for us. I mean, my body makes it. If I don't have enough, my liver is going to make it. So it's in my body regardless. So it doesn't mean that that's necessarily bad. I just think how things are packaged. It's like me saying that, I'm going to eat meat that has been, dipped in, gasoline and covered in bacteria. That meat is bad for me. No, it's the gasoline and the bacteria that's surrounding it. So if plants contain essential or at least helpful nutrients, i.e. starch, glucose, maybe some vitamins, but what else is contained in there? Are they problematic or not? And a lot of people talk about these phytonutrients. Some of them are important. Interestingly, beef, meat, lamb, chicken, whatever, will accumulate phytonutrients. So it's not like the meat is devoid of phytonutrients. Those animals that eat it, they display some of it in their tissue. So you end up getting some of that anyway. But so I think we should just take away the healthy halos around all foods and just say, hey, look, you're going to have to find this out, what works for you. And just because, grandma said that eat your spinach, it's going to make you regular, go to the bathroom, doesn't mean that there aren't negative consequences to eating a bunch of spinach, because there can be.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things, and we can argue whether they're valid or not, but IgG food intolerance tests and these whole kind of immunoglobulin activity and heightened immune system that happens when people eat certain foods. I've done a few of them for patients. I've done one for myself, even through the process just of elimination and journaling and seeing how they feel. I've never met anybody, not a single human, that's had some form of allergic or immune response to meat. Ever.
That's I was going to say there's a fellow by the name of Julian Kirby. He's a PhD out of Cambridge, England, and I lectured last year back when we could travel in Malaysia, and he basically had a company that was what they did. They did these food sensitivity, immunoglobulin, immune system tests on all these foods, and they've been doing it for 20 years, and they've done something like 250,000 tests every year for 20 years, something like 5 million tests total. And he said the same thing. Red meat almost never shows up as a problem. Now you see dairy and seafood and chicken and all kinds of plants and stuff. But as far as red meat, it's probably one of the least reactive issues in our body, the foodstuffs in our body. So I think it's, it just makes sense it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective why that would be. So yes, I've seen that too, and I think that's very fascinating.
Yeah. Hey, more of a clinical kind of. So I do see some people that have difficulty breaking down meat, like they have low stomach acidity, and they've been taking proton pump inhibitors and things like Nexium over time, and they eat meat and they cannot cleave apart the proteins, and they get more bloated. What happens when you go on a purely carnivore diet? Can you over time build up that acidity? Are they able to repair that, or is that something that you've seen in the people that are doing it?
I have seen people improve their capacity to digest. And again, it's probably one of those things, it depends how far gone they are. It's like if somebody has an arthritic knee that, is a little bit mechanically disturbed and a little bit swollen, and you get rid of that inflammation, it may go back to where you don't notice it. But if somebody's got a knee that's like, crooked completely and there's nothing left and it's just the bones are deformed, a meat-based diet is not going to fix that. You might feel a little bit better. So there's probably some level of, you've gone past the point of maybe no return, but clearly we are somewhat plastic with that. And, our body it tends to prioritize the things that, first of all, I think these proton pump inhibitors are generally a bad idea, particularly long-term. And that's generally they're designed for the short-term thing, but people end up taking them for years and years, and they tend to cause all kinds of problems. But we do have some degree of plasticity. And I think what happens, what people don't, many people don't realize it, producing an extremely acidic stomach is very energetically costly. It takes a lot of, ATP to make all that acid. And your body didn't do it for the heck of it. It's like, oh, we're just going to waste energy. Your body's very smart and thoughtful. And the reason it produced all this very strong acidic stomach is because the food source we evolved to eat was basically meat. And so that's where the stomach acid comes through. So if you eat a plant-based, low-fat, low meat diet for years and years and years, your body's going to say, well, hell, why am I wasting all that energy producing all this acid? We don't even need it anymore. So you may lose some of those, hydrochloric acid producing cells, some of the different cells in the stomach that they don't differentiate. The lining of the gut is constantly turning over, so new cells are being produced. And so they're produced in different amounts. And so what we see is, all of a sudden they're saying, wait a minute, somebody's not been eating it for a while, suddenly he starts eating it again, and the body's saying, wait a minute, we need more, acid producing cells. And so that sort of gets ramped up over time. So I have seen it. Some people will find supplementation with stomach, with acid, assisting supplements help initially, and then they don't need to do that anymore. But yeah, many people can improve that.
I was looking around to see if I can find. I actually got it here. If people haven't read this, and I don't know if you've read it, Dr. Baker, but The Vegetarian Myth by Leah Keith, an amazing book.
I've read excerpts of it. I've interviewed Leah, so I'm very familiar with it, but I've not actually read it cover to cover. But yeah, I agree. A lot of people do reference that as a pretty good counter argument to vegetarianism, veganism, and she's paid for it with a lot of detractors and people that have kind of threatened her, I think, violently, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. We had her in an interview and we spoke about stomach acidity, and she thinks that throughout the 20 years of eating a vegan diet, she completely destroyed her ability to create any acid, and so now she will permanently supplement with HCl 3 times a day to make sure that she can kind of digest the meat. And I don't know if that will have to be a permanent thing, but her idea was that she had permanently destroyed her ability to create stomach acid because of just sticking to a vegan diet.
Well, I mean, I think there's definitely some long-term negative sequelae of a vegan diet for some people. Some people lose their teeth. They develop things. Some people will have issues that maybe they can't recover from. Not all of them do that, but I mean, certainly some do. And I've got I started a Facebook group for recovering vegans, and I've got 3,000, I think, in there right now. So I sometimes will pop in there and see what they're talking about. And it's pretty eye-opening to see some of the maladies that they develop, purportedly due to that diet. And so I think it can be problematic for a lot of people. And so I think, again, I'm of the belief that we should be able to eat whatever we want as adults. I think kids is a little bit different story, but you should. I mean, I guess a buyer beware. You should look at both sides. And same thing with the carnivore diet. There's people who say, well, I don't like it for this reason or that reason. Fine, don't do it. I don't care. I don't sit there in the streets with signs saying, tomatoes are murder or something like that, trying to shame people into eating this diet or that diet. I'm just like, look, this is available to you. it helps a lot of people. You may be suffering needlessly because of whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hey, what's the name of the Facebook group? The vegan recovery Facebook
It's
group?
called Restoration Health Vegan Recovery Group. And it is a private group, and I made that intentionally that way because we didn't want people harassing the ex-vegans. And again, as much as I come out kind of a hard ass to vegans, I tend to push back against veganism, and so because they have a lot of misinformation, propaganda, so I try to sort of dispel that. But I don't care if somebody wants to choose that as their lifestyle. Maybe like my children, I would kind of give them a hard time. But I think, as an adult, you can choose that, but you should also realize that there's a lot of counter information that's out there, and what they're telling you is not the whole story.
Absolutely. Hey, without taking too much more of your time, because we'll probably wrap it up soon, we have a question here about what does it feel like when first starting carnivore diet, and did you supplement with things? I kind of want the people who don't know you to get an idea of who you are. I mean, how old are you? What kind of records do you hold? Because, when we think of people 50s and above, most of society is broken, frail, has no muscle mass, can barely get off the toilet. And so they end up in with caretakers and homes. And so how are you feeling, and what do you do, and how are you doing that on a carnivore diet?
Yeah, so I've been on the fully carnivore diet now for about 4 years and I guess about 3 months now. I just turned 54 a couple of days ago, and to celebrate that, I deadlifted. It was, I guess I'll put it in kilos. I think it was about 185 kilos, so 405 pounds. I did it for 55 repetitions. One rep every minute on the minute. So every minute I lift it, and I just kept doing it until I got to 54, and then I added one because I'm growing, one to grow on type of thing. So I've got world records on Constitute rowing machines. I set 3 world records when I turned 50. I'm still I'm probably going to set another one this year. I was a world champion and world record holder in the Highland Games. I won a world championships in rowing. I was a competitive power lifter where I had a 350 kilo drug-free deadlift. In my younger days, I threw track and field, where I was Masters All-American in 3 events. I said we talked about rugby. I played that in New Zealand at a high level, playing on the field with a lot of the All Blacks. So I've been an athlete my whole life. I still train every day, and I train extremely hard. And I still am, competing, and will always hopefully do so. And like I said, I think I'm just getting started. And honestly, even in my 50s, I'm performing in training just as hard, if not harder, than I was in my 20s and 30s. And I feel great. I wake up every day, lots of energy. I don't have sore joints or sore muscles. It doesn't take me an hour to warm up. When I go to the gym, I walk in there and I start working out. I don't spend 20 minutes dynamic stretching and rolling, and I don't need to. There's people that would say that maybe they disagree, but I don't have tight joints. I've got good range of motion, good flexibility, and plenty of energy. I do it without carbohydrates. I'm using glucose for sure. My body makes it, and this is how I would argue we're designed to. We're designed to run on glucose and fat, but the glucose we make very nicely, and it's very well regulated by our liver, and other hormones regulate that production.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things that I'll probably point out is that you also managed to become a doctor and have clear thinking, because I see brain fog, anxiety, and depression, and mental health issues are huge now. And I wrote a really great paper on understanding mental health and nutrition. And when we look at things like amino acids and tyrosine and tryptophan and phenylalanine and all these building blocks for dopamine, serotonin, and GABA, they come from protein, they come from meat. We know that B12 deficiencies can lead to things like psychosis long term. And not only are you physically able to do those things, but mentally you were clear and able to perform at a pretty high level, which is for me more important than deadlifting, even though that's fucking awesome, deadlifting 180 kilos for 55 reps. So
well, yeah, the cognition part, there's people, my detractors would argue my cognition is very poor, but I beg to differ on that. But I think that the mental health issue is extremely important, and yes, it is dramatically rising, and the current situation is probably making it worse for many people. And diet does play a huge role in that. There's a physician out of Harvard University named Chris Palmer, who's a great guy, who I've interviewed a couple times, and he is doing a lot of work around diet and mental health disorders, including things like schizophrenia, depression, bipolar disorder, so on and so forth. And, it's one of those things. There was a nice study, I think was out of somewhere in one of the universities in California, perhaps Stanford, where they looked at major depressive disorder, and they found that people that had major depressive disorder had uniquely low levels of carnitine in their blood. And carnitine is something that we can make, but it's conditionally necessary to ingest. And so what we see is people that are on plant-based diets tend to have low serum carnitine levels, and that's associated again with these major depressive disorders. And we know that meat is a uniquely good, rich source of carnitine. There's I think the only plant food that contains carnitine might be asparagus. But other than that, you can pretty much only get it in meat. So if you're on a meat-free diet, you're going to have likely low levels of carnitine. Even though we can make it at a small, low background level, it's probably not sufficient to continue to maintain our mental health, at least for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get that argument from veganism where it's like, well, I can get my B12 from this, and I can get my if I do this combination, but there are so many nutrients, acetylcholine, carnitine. There's so many things that you will not get from a plant-based diet. You just won't.
Well, I mean, one of the things with the B12 argument, and I see that one of the counter arguments is, that, well, even meat eaters, omnivores are low in B12, which is true. But my counter to that is we, even as omnivores, don't eat enough meat. I mean, if we look at like the U.S., for instance, the amount of beef that the average American eats is only about 2 ounces a day. That is a abysmally small amount. So that is one of the reasons we're probably B12 deficient. When I look at B12 labs and most people who are on a carnivore diet, they're either high or above the top of the range. They're higher than normal. So I don't see deficiencies in people that are eating, meat-based diet. What I do see it is in people that are eating a standard American diet, which, by the way, or standard Australian diet, which is likely the same, is 70 to 75% plant-based. We are already on a plant-based diet. Now, much of that plant-based stuff is garbage. I mean, it's seed oils and sugars and refined grains, but still, that is plant-based stuff. The meat or the animal source portion of the diet is a very small portion. It's about 25%, and much of that is just milk and dairy. So if we just say what's meat, like what I'm eating, red meat, it's a tiny, tiny amount. I mean, I eat probably, and I'm not embarrassed to say this, but I eat probably 20 to 25 times the amount of red meat that the average American eats. And if it were awful and bad for us, like we're being told, I should already be dead, I suppose, or I should be extremely sick and not breaking world records and running around like a 20-year-old in my 50s. I mean, it just doesn't add up. And so I think there's some level of common sense that people, you would think, but there's people out there that are going to continue. I mean, I've got people out there telling me that I'm going to die of scurvy any day now, and I'm like, when's that going to kick in?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, we'll wrap this up soon, but I had a question here that I was kind of writing notes on my phone to questions and topics that I wanted to bring up, and my partner was like, well, does he have a plan to reintroduce food? Like, what's his long-term goal? What is your long-term goal? Like, do you have a plan to reintroduce anything, or do you feel so good that you're just happy?
Well, I'm not opposed to it. I mean, like I said, I'm not dogmatically doing this just because of that. So, I mean, it's I have said, like I said, on certain occasions, like my kid's birthday, I've had a piece of cake. Not because I was like craving cake because it was his birthday and it made my kiddo happy for that I celebrated with them. I don't put a ribeye on a plate for my kid and put a candle on it. When they're little kids, this doesn't work so well. But and I had some, and I didn't really have any problems with it. I mean, one time I did, one time I didn't. One piece of cake made me really sick. One piece made me fine. I think it's very interesting, and I think and I don't discourage people from reintroducing foods. In fact, I often encourage it. I say, hey, look, this, just when I try to get people to do this as a treatment, I say, look, this is a elimination style diet. We're going to do it as long as we need to. For you, maybe 3 months, 6 months, I think it's a fair goal to try to solve these issues. And then if we want to introduce foods, we can do that in a systematic fashion. And that's one of the things we're trying to figure out is a relationship between different conditions, and different demographics, and different reactions, and in different foods. And so that's one of the goals at MeatRx, is start to figure that out, so people can find a diet that may give them a little bit more freedom. It's probably still going to be animal-based or animal-focused, but they can say, hey, I'm meat plus fruit, or meat plus broccoli, or whatever it ends up being. We don't know yet. But my long-term goal is just to enjoy life, be happy, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to be out here, saying, "Oh my God, I put a molecule of parsley on my plate. Something awful is going to happen." I don't believe that. But I just try to, like I said, I just go by results. And, like if next week I decide, hey, I want to eat some blueberries, I'll eat some blueberries. But right now, I don't have a desire to. I don't have a craving for it. I don't feel I need to. I'm performing and doing quite well with one of that. And I like the food. It's not like I dislike the food I'm eating. Like I said, it's like I had two nice, beautiful ribeye steaks, an hour before we started, and I enjoyed the heck out of
Yeah.
it.
Absolutely. What's funny, what's ironic is that I've prescribed carnivore to a few of our patients. They've gotten some really good results, but I've never went full carnivore. I eat very much meat based. Like last night's dinner was a Scotch steak and a ribeye in one sitting. Every meal contains some form of meat or protein with some vegetables. It's always kind of like a paleo style of diet. But I think I might give it a good shot. And I understand like the inflection point that you always speak about is about 3 months. So
that's
3 months.
That's the data that we've got so far. When we looked at about 12,000 people doing it, we saw sort of you're right, an inflection point where a lot of people were saying good result to excellent results tended to occur at 3 months for just about every metric we measured. So I mean, like I said, we always have these 30-day challenges and stuff, and that's kind of an intro to see who wants to go. But I think really, if you want to give it a real go, 3 months is probably it. And I think like I said, I'll talk about MeterX. I think getting support is really helpful because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think one of the things people struggle with is they get no support because most of the stuff out there is still, oh, you're going to kill yourself, you're going to get, you're going to have a heart attack, you're going to get colon cancer, how dare you, blah blah blah, and it's a bunch of kind of nonsense. But so having that support system is very helpful. And like I said, we offer a free month. Just join up. We've got people from Australia, we got people from the UK, we got people from South America, from India, we all over the world. We got people from Russia, we got people from just about every country that's out there. We've got people that are members of our group right now. It's really been fun, to see all these folks excel and succeed.
Absolutely. And does it get worse before it gets better? Like I know Rogan speaks about the diarrhea, and some people have had, they go through 2 weeks there where they might get some diarrhea, and then things get really, really good, and they get great results. What can people expect if they wake up today and just eat meat?
Well, I mean, for some people, sure. I mean, there is a transition period, and sometimes it's a little bit more challenging. So for some people who are familiar with a ketogenic diet, there's kind of a similar shift in fluids that's going on. I think when it comes to the gut function, there's a number of different variables that are occurring. If you remove fiber completely from your diet, your colon is going to say, wait a minute, where's all the fiber? Why am I getting all this liquid now? Because it's not used to that, because the liquid is usually bound up in the fiber. So it has to deal with that, and that may take a few weeks to sort of transition. Sometimes it's too much fat. Some people will go overboard on the fat initially. What most people will notice, when it comes to gastrointestinal function is they're not going to make as much waste, because when you're on a plant-based, particularly heavy fiber-based diet, all that just ends up in the toilet. I mean, most of the nutrition you eat, or at least a good portion of it, you don't even absorb. You just crap it right out. And with a meat-based diet, pretty much we absorb all of our nutrition in the small intestine before it ever gets to the large intestine. So there's not much there. It's a very small amount. So you may notice that, hey, I don't go to the bathroom for a few days, or even a week for some people. You may notice when I do go to the bathroom, it's every other day instead of 2 or 3 times a day. And so, but that's normal. That's not like bad. There's people out there that are like, oh my God, I didn't have a bowel movement today. I'm like, oh, good. Don't have to waste more toilet paper. I don't have to waste time, and it's like, so there's no benefit for having 3 bowel movements a day or having giant bowel movements. You don't get a award at the end of life. There's a nice study by Ann Peary, Journal of Gastroenterology, about 5-6 years ago, looking at colonoscopies and people that ate the most fiber and people that ate the least fiber. The people that ate the most fiber had the most bowel movements, had the highest incidence of diverticulosis, which can later turn into diverticulitis. And so, there's a transition. There's a number of things. We've got a big FAQ at MeterX. You can read about that and see what to expect potentially.
Awesome. Well, guys, MeterX is the place to go. Dr. Baker, thank you so much for coming on. I know you're a busy man and doing many of these interviews, but thanks for jumping on. And hopefully when you come here to Australia, we can have some steak and do some training together.
Yeah. What part of Australia are you in?
Sydney.
Sydney. Okay. Well, that's definitely, if I come to Australia, I'll have to hit Sydney for sure. It's obviously one of the main deals. All right. Well, thank you, Marco. Appreciate it.
Thank you, mate.